All right, and we are live with the next episode of P5Live Sessions. Welcome back, welcome live, or welcome to you in the future. What are we doing? We're just improvising with P5 Live. We're going to start up a new sketch, and we are just messing around for an hour, starting with some rough idea maybe of what we're going to do, and then just play and hopefully accidentally learn some things along the way. I'll try and explain what I'm doing. I'll try to just mess around, and hopefully we'll both discover some unique new aspects of P5, of coding. Let's see. So I decided this afternoon what I was going to play with is moirés. And what exactly are moirés? It's usually this effect when different lines cross over each other and get too close to one another or overlap in really interesting ways, a moiré pattern, as it's often known. And there's tons of ways to create these, essentially just having lots of fine lines next to each other. This will probably also be a great experiment to see how well the algorithm of compression handles whatever I send at you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off and just do a basic loop and just create a bunch of circles, because that's like the first really simple way that I know how to make a moiré. I'm going to say that the background is 0, no fill, and a stroke will be white. And then what am I drawing? I'm doing an ellipse that I'll set in the center, and I'll make them slowly get bigger, like I times 10. There we go. We already have moirés, at least on my display, just based on those things being pretty close to each other. And I see an interesting pattern appear here. I don't know if you do. It depends really on how close or far away these things are from each other. It'll probably make a big difference if I have no smooth on to make hard pixels. And yeah, so there I start to see the moiré. If I go like 12, maybe it's interesting to say mouse X and let this thing be flexible. And at certain points, I see interesting moirés happen. And a really easy way to get those moirés to happen is to have this twice and say there's an offset of like 1 or 2 pixels between them. And then I should definitely get some interesting moirés to appear. Maybe just 1 between, 2 between, 3, 4. So now these things are just kind of offset slightly. And maybe I even have it be a little bit smaller, like -1. Maybe that should be in a parenthesis, I'm not quite sure. Let's see. There, a pattern starts to appear. There we go. Yeah, so that's interesting. Moiré already appearing. Let me switch this from 6 back to like 2 and 1. And if I go 0, barely anything. 2, it starts to appear. 4, it starts to fold. 6, 8, 12, 14, 18. Interesting. Let's do frame count modulo 20 to let the thing animate. 20. What about 30? Yeah, I probably don't hit a looping section just because it's constantly going off. But maybe if I did -60 and then I did 120, then I could let that thing like slowly shift over and start back at the beginning. A sine wave would be even better. Yeah, essentially that's what's happening if I zoom way into this thing, because it's based on the size of my mouse. Okay, but that's kind of an interesting movement, one way to get a moiré. I'm going to start trying to save and take pictures of things more often because I always forget to take pictures. So let's give this guy a name already. Rename and call this P5Live Sessions moiré. Yeah, I'll just call it the first one, moiré 1. Okay, and now what I want to do is stop this movement from happening and just say like +2. And I'm going to have this amount change a whole lot more. So +5. Let's see what this looks like. +2, +3, +4, +5. Who knows if you can see these differences at all on the live stream, or if they're just totally lost. Yeah, so now this is making like a big change of being smaller than a certain amount. What if I make it bigger than the other one? Let me shrink this down a bit. Interesting patterns start to appear. Okay, but what might be nice is just letting some of these things move around on their own, and maybe just through a little bit of animated movement, we get different kinds of patterns to appear. So I think what could be nice, this thing isn't so happy when this thing gets huge. So what I'll do is I'll just say, let s equal height divided by 2. Actually, that would be massive. Let's go back to just like 10 apart from each other. S plus 1, 2. Okay. I'm going to change this thing into a little class so I can have a bunch of these things and tell them what to do. Class, let me call this moiré. Yeah, I'll just call it that. And let's add a constructor for generating the initial ones, which will have an x value. I'll probably tell them where to be. X, Y. I'm going to tell them maybe how many loops, a loop count, and I'm going to tell them a distance. Maybe I'll just call it gap between them. So that'll equal x. This dot y will equal y. This dot loop count will equal loop count. And this dot gap will equal the gap I feed it. And then we're going to have a display. If we type it right, display. And I'm going to put all those things together just like I have above. So I'll simply say copy paste, move this in. We're only going to draw a single one of them. It's going to, I think what would be best is to do some push and popping and translating. That way I could do interesting rotates later on if I want. So I'll translate to wherever x and y are. That way I can draw this thing at 0, 0. And for them to know how big to be, it might be, I don't know if it's too heavy on it, but it might be good to just map this out. So I'll say let s be a map, and that is I comes in. It goes from 0 to this dot loop count minus 1. Means I also should replace 50 with the loop count. And I want it to go from, I think I don't really care. I could start at 0. Maybe I change it later. Up to, maybe instead of gap, I give it a max size. This will be like max size. I changed my mind. Max size, max size. From 0 up to this dot max size. And then it will figure out the gap automatically. Because I think I'll also get some interesting moirés, just sometimes having 10 or 20 lines. And the size is S for size. All right, I think that should work. Let's turn off all of this. I forgot to clone. Whoops. Okay, this thing's working. Let's clone and get away from it before we turn it off, because this is the fancy class version. And now I can get rid of that. I'll say let moirés be an array. Let's just have 2 of them to begin with. Should we use a lowercase m, because this is just a variable array. Dot push, I'm going to add something into it, a new moiré, which will have a position of the center of the page. it'll have a loop count. Let's just do 20. And its max size, I'll say, is height. Okay, let's see if this works. So then I can say for let m of moirés, assuming I don't need an I counter in there. I usually m.display. Is it of or in? I forget. Maybe it's in. Nope, I'm pretty sure it's of. Moirés, moiré. Push, translate to that spot. Draw from that spot. What if I don't do this and just say moirés 0.display? Alright, it's not happy about something. X is not defined. Damn, that is why, because it is of this dot x and of this dot y. Now it should work. There we go. Let's turn the loop back on and see if that works. Yep, great. Yeah, so this is the nice shorthand way in ES6 JavaScript to go through a loop, but I usually end up changing back to a normal for loop with an I counter, because sometimes you need I. But so this is ready to display as many of these things as we have, so let's make a second one that is 30 loops and the same size, and then we start to get another moiré happening. If I go 40, or maybe 41, 21, this is probably where some of these moirés will appear. What about 22, 23, 24? Yeah, the whole point of this is just trying to get these different moirés to appear. 22, 66, 266, a whole lot of them, which probably gets lost on your display. And then it's all about a question of the stroke weight, of course. Stroke weight 0.2, 0.5. Maybe I should go height times 2 to let those things be a bit bigger. Now we're filling the screen. And I'm sure that's still way too many of these things. What's 150 like? Yeah, there's a gap, but we still get a nice moiré to appear. Hopefully you can see it too. If I go to a thicker stroke, that kind of disappears. If I go even thicker, it's barely there. But actually, the thinner I have the stroke, the more I can see that image. Ooh, that's a nice one. 0.6, 0.7. Don't forget to take some screenshots of these things. Again, in P5Live, I just press Control S and it saves me a copy of the current screen as a PNG and the code, so I can always jump back to it. So right now I'm just playing with a couple positions to see what they're like. 6.2, 6.0. Okay, let me leave it there and add another one that's a little bit bigger. And maybe now I'll mess with one of them. I'll say moirés 2 dot loop count equals mouse x. There is no 2-1. It's actually number 1. And then see if there's some interesting spots that it can hit just by building the right number of these things. Ah, there was one. Interesting, starts to get some ripples. I think it's hard to stop the mouse at just the right spot. I should probably preview what this is looking like in the stream to have any idea if this is working, but I don't know, hopefully it is. Otherwise you could recreate it for yourself in parallel. Yeah, so there's a couple of interesting spots along there. Ah, there's one that really goes zap. So it's a question, what exactly should those be? Is it interesting to animate those? Where exactly should the animation be? I'm not sure. But Or maybe it's interesting to play with the x position of it. Moirés 1.x equals mouse x. And then I'm free to move it slightly from side to side and exploit moirés happening from that movement. And it's probably nice that they're big and filling the page so we can't really tell how much they're moving because we don't see the edge of it unless I pull it way over. So let me actually make fewer and see what that's like. If I move, now the computer is way happier. I'm drawing a lot less and still getting that effect to happen a bit. But maybe the stroke weight is too low to really see this stuff happening. Maybe I can go, yeah, I guess as I draw fewer, then I can let the lines get thicker and the moiré still hangs out there. I'm sure the compression is happier about such a thick stroke. All right, awesome. Great to hear that the moiré is working. Yeah, I hope it's even a different artifact than I see. That's something to do, is just try to bit crush whatever you're doing and feeding into the stream. Something fun that you can do, FYI, in P5Live, a new thing in the latest version under Meta, I believe. No, it's under Canvas. There is a sketch for embedding. So of course I could embed the live feed in the background of this thing and get some weird extra feedback going, but I'm not going to do that. But it could be interesting, maybe in a future episode, I'll design stuff and show that feed in the background so that I can see myself seconds in the past and get an idea of how well something's working. But let's keep playing with what these are. I have a feeling it's really cool to let these each have their own stroke weight, so there's no reason to have them be the same. And I think I immediately need to give some movement happening here because this is going to be nice to do this. So I'm going to say, maybe I'm going to create an offset for these things so that they can kind of animate. I'll say this dot x off equals 0, this dot y off equals 0, and I'll tell them to be that spot plus this dot off x off, and the same for the y, so I can create some movement. And that way I can turn this off, rebuild them, make it a little smaller. And then I could just say, not this, moirés 1 dot x off equals a sine wave of the frame count times 0.1 times 5. There we go. So now I just have some constant motion while I figure out some other stuff. Maybe it's a little fast. And this way I don't actually disturb where they're placed. It's just like how much it offset from that location. But now I think it would be fun to actually change their stroke weights as well. So I'm going to set some of the style definitions here and say stroke weight is this dot SW, which doesn't exist yet. This dot SW by default is 1. And then instead of setting everything to be 3, yeah, maybe do I want to feed it with 1? Maybe I'll say 1, and then I'll say 3, so I can give them initial values. I'll call it SW, and it's SW. There we go. So now 1 initializes with 2 or 10. Maybe if I only build a few of these things, then it could be thicker. That starts to have an interesting, almost parallax style movement. Yeah, maybe it's interesting to have a whole bunch of these things and see how many of them I could draw and what kind of shape they make. So let me make one more manually. And I'm going to have this one let's see, maybe 50. and make it small, 0.5. Okay, but only one of them is actually moving. The other ones are static. So then I could change which of them is moving. Now it's the one with really tiny lines. Let me make its lines thicker. Or I move the very first one, which is the thicker lines. Very subtle changes. Can make it move more. And then maybe it's interesting to let each of them move at slightly different speeds. So I'm going to let the last two of them move at, maybe one is half as fast as the other. I have a feeling it'll be nice to make that one not so thick. I'm just going to start it over. The more I change in this setup, the more we get this kind of disruptive change, which isn't so smooth. It's of course nicer to change it in the draw where we get this soft compile changing. And maybe once I need to make them all the same size so we don't see a difference between the lines. We just see the moiré of this movement going back and forth. And now if I stare at this thing for a while and then look down at my keyboard, all kinds of fun manipulation is happening to the keys. Let's let one of them kill my fan. 150 loops or 100 loops. Maybe let one of them go even further. Just enough that hopefully we don't see the edge of the circle. Of course, it can also be nice to let some color introduced. Right now they're all the same color, so they eventually white out. And maybe I'll set color mode to be HSB 100. And then give them a chance to have a unique color. So let's also set up a color value in here. This dot, let's call this dot stroke. I don't know if that's allowed. Let's call it stroke color equals a color that is, let's start off with just random 100. 100 saturation, 100 brightness. And then let's use it and say stroke is this dot stroke color. Strange that they're not actually getting that random. Because I set the coloring after I built them. Let's set the color first. There we go. Trippy. Fancy. Run it again. Yeah, it's nice because the random is happening in the constructor. It's not freaking out and giving me a random color all the time. It's just on that initial execution, running it. And HSB mode, hue, saturation, brightness, makes it nice and easy to change the color just with the first value, the hue. I have a feeling this will look a lot cooler if it gets a little thicker. Ooh, that's a nice color combo. So I'm gonna let these things be much thicker. Actually, I could just change it quickly by saying, let's test this out. m.sw equals 5. There we go. Yeah, I want to try to avoid pressing the setup as often as possible. So now I could test 15 is way too big. We can't see anything. We can't see anything. How interesting. That's not surprising because each one, then we could only see the latest one. And then what I think I have to test out, this is really cool. Now we're getting an extra moiré from just that gap where we can see through the top layer. So it's like slicing in and revealing aspects of the other. I want to test some other colors. I think I should slow everything down. I think it's moving too fast. Let's slow it all down. Let's just add a 0 in here. And that's going to be way too slow, but maybe not. Now I can appreciate and enjoy it building these different patterns. I want to check out another color. Maybe what I need to do is just say, if I press a key or so, I can generate new colors. That way I don't have to regenerate the whole thing. So let's make a function for that. Function key pressed. I'll call it R. If key code equals R, do my random thing, and I'll just cycle through the loop. And basically just copy this line, have it generate for M a new stroke color. And maybe instead of R for random, I'll use C for color. So I can press C and nothing happens. Bummer. This dot stroke call. I pressed, because it's not the key code, it's the key. Let's try that again. There we go. Yeah, that way I don't disturb the movement that they were in. I can just change their color. That's quite nice. And maybe each of these needs to be a slightly different thickness. Maybe I should be thicker from the back and have it get thinner and thinner to the front so that we can have a better chance to see through the thing. So now I want my counter. Maybe it's enough to just create a counter here. Let's say let C equals 0, C++. And now let's use C here and say 8 minus C. There we go. So it should be thicker in the back, thinner in the front. And let me go back to, 12. Too much. 10. Barely visible. Super subtle. It's a little hard to see these things, but maybe that's because I have so many on this last one. Maybe that's what's causing the problem. So if I go down to 50, there we go. Now I can see through everything much better. And now I can probably also go much thicker. $15. Let's turn off that minus C again and see what this looks like. Yeah, there's so many little things to test out and try now, including having them all be the exact same loop count. Instead of having to start over, let me just test out doing it here and say loop count is 12. Just kidding, it's 50. And now I can see what happens if they all share the same loop count, because of course interesting things happen when they're different, but also when they're the same. 80, not okay. 20. Ooh, that creates some nice moments. I think they're traveling too far away from each other. So maybe I'll just limit how far they are allowed to travel. Oops, that was nice, being larger. Even larger. One of them should go quite far. The stroke weight is probably too thick. Yeah, I think there's also just too few of these things. I think it's nice to increase that number. And now we're getting some interesting color moires appearing. It starts out kind of pinkish vertically and then also becomes pinkish to green on the side until we change the color. Ooh, that's a nice combo. Let's tweak the size or stroke weight of these. Yeah, it starts to get really flat the minute that I make the stroke weight thick. There's a couple ways to affect that. Visual feedback is always a favorite way to make the thing a little bit softer and let the canvas do some distortion for me, or P3D WebGL can also create some nice artifacts. I think I'm going to save the sketch as it is right now. Let me give this a name and call it moiré class with color. And then I'm going to clone. And I'm already going to call this one WebGL. Because now I'm going to split off into 3D space and see what happens. What can we take advantage of in the 3D space? So I say WebGL and my coordinate system screws up. And then the nice thing is I just have to say 0, 0 for all of these spots. Back to the center, back to the center. All right. So now in WebGL we have interesting changes. Now we have a stroke detail, or a ellipse detail, I think it's called. Ellipse detail. If I say 5, that's not what it is. What is it? Control R for the references. Ellipse, not mode. Detail, nope. Maybe you just add it to the ellipse itself. You do, you give it a 5th value if you're in WebGL mode for how many steps it should take to draw this ellipse. So I'm going to have to duplicate the size twice, rather here, and then give it a detail like 5. Gives me pentagon moirés. Interesting. Change up the color on that. Ooh, looks almost anaglyphic. Or I could say 15. Or 25. I don't know if there's a max. I should have looked at the reference. Control R, ellipse. Is there a maximum amount? Maybe not. There's as much as my fan will let me do. 45. It gets smoother. It's looking closer to a normal ellipse. You know, it's also making everything harsh as I set no smooth a long time ago. That surely had an effect. Yeah, change up the color. This could also be where it's nice to even animate what its color is. Instead of going random, I could let the values alternate. That's an interesting pattern. But because we're in 3D now, I think it's time to mess with some rotation of these things. Let's see, where is the translate is happening here. I actually really didn't need to translate besides. Let's see, no, I think I'll just give it some rotation. So I'm going to create this.rot, which will be a create vector at 0, 0, 0. So that way I have like a rot.x, rot.y. And then after I translate, I'm going to do a rotate y is this dot rot dot, I forget if I should use x or y. I'll use y. I'll keep it parallel to that. And I'm just going to repeat this 3 times. X, Z, X, Z. And this way I can do some interesting like bendings in 3D space to those objects. This plays a role, the order of these things, if I'm using multiple, more than one, but we'll play at first with just a single one and see what happens. So let's mess with these things too. Maybe just one of them at the beginning. Let's play, we haven't been playing with number 0. So let me say moiré 0.rot.x is a sine wave. Actually, let's just set it to be a certain degree. All right. So now we're rotating one at 15 degrees or mouse Y degrees. I forgot I should use either angle mode, degrees, or I should just surround all these with radians. It's probably nicer because for timing, I'm used to using radians. So to be able to send it degrees, I just have to convert all those numbers to radians. So there we go. And now I can see what happens if you just like change up the color. If I give just a little bit of angle to these, we can get some interesting curves happening in the moiré. So it might be nice to give each of these a slightly random pitch. Not so much that we really see the thing, although it could be interesting to turn all of them. But I think I just want like a little bit of angle in each one. So I could easily test that out. Let me turn this off for a minute. And instead of giving them a 0 here, let's just give them a random from -2 to 2. There's an interesting break right in the middle of the canvas, for better or worse. Let's tweak the thickness of these things, see what this looks like. I'm optimistic when you get to a certain thick stroke. What will actually be really interesting right now, I forgot, is in 2D mode, you wouldn't be able to see through the things if one is too thick, but now that we're in WebGL mode, we get to play with Z-index fighting, and that's a super cool phenomenon. For this, I'm actually going to turn off the rotation for a minute and let these things duke it out in their Z-axis. So that's a whole interesting thing to look into, Z-axis fighting. It can't go so big. But basically, if anything is on the exact same Z-axis as someone else, they like rip into each other's textures. So it's not doing quite as much as I hoped. Let me go back to playing with just this. There we go. We can experience some Z-axis fighting there. I think we're like rips through, but it's so fast. Maybe if I go divided by 100, I can make small enough steps. Nope, we lost it. Where did it go? Maybe I should say like 90 plus. Or nope. What if I play with the y-axis of it instead? Okay. So much for that. 15. So that is what is happening. It's surprisingly, oh, there we go. Because it left off at that other rotation, that's why. Okay, yeah, these aren't ripping into each other as much as I expected. Even if it's like right on the spot, it's still the latest one covers up the rest, so that's a little disappointing. Maybe I should use this -C to make them a little bit smaller than each other. Okay, not as interesting as I hoped. So we tried it, we turn it off. Go back to where we were. We can turn off this rotation. And let's give them some rotation at the beginning. Random -2 to 2. And maybe that could be interesting on all of these axes. What isn't so nice is the way in WebGL that these angles meet each other, but I think I can probably control that with this this gap between them, this metering or so. So at the moment they have 45 steps between them. If I go down to like 15 or 12, interesting, starts to become like a circus tent. But it would be really nice to fix this little gap where these things meet, and I'm going to see if I can adjust that with, what is it called? It's like stroke cap or stroke join. I'm curious if it's stroke join. Let's see. Does that affect a ellipse? I should be able to do it anywhere. doesn't have an effect or is not allowed in WebGL. Fine, no stroke join. What about stroke cap and round? Also not allowed. Does it tell me that? Okay, there is no stroke cap for WebGL, I guess. Stroke join, stroke. Okay, fine. That might not be a thing. Test it out for a second with a fill. Nope, no fill. Let's go back down to just a small stroke. And maybe it's interesting to add a whole bunch more of these things. This has been like fairly consistent with 3. I think it's time to test out a bunch of these things. So let me make a for loop. And let's start off with 10 of them. Turn all of this off. We're going to lose our image for a minute. Turn it back on. Ooh, now getting a bunch of color in there. Maybe I give this, maybe the movement should happen inside the class so that they're independently moving instead of manually telling just a couple of them to move. What happens if I limit this so I don't have too many? Only a gap of 10 and the stroke weight is being controlled elsewhere. Wow, that starts to get quite some interesting shading in there. But I think more of them need to move. Right now only 2 of them are moving. So we should affect this X off to be amongst all of them. Maybe it's like they need to know a speed that they move and a distance they're allowed to go. Because of course it's interesting if they move like far away. What if I say 150? It breaks it. So actually they shouldn't move too much and reveal their circle. I think it's a lot cooler when they're just kind of moving around creating textures, but we don't really see them too much on their own. Nice, going through different circles or different colors. Yeah, there's so many of them right now. We get all kinds of trippy shading. They look quite complex. Not so much in the center. Be nice to work on that space in the center. Maybe it has to do with them just being so big. If I temporarily size them down, then we get this kind of umbrella quality happening over them. Spider webs, colorful spider webs. Ooh, if this whole thing spun, then we could be creating loaders. Rotate Z. We need some radians. Radians. Frame count divided by 2. There we go. We can generate spinning loaders, pretending that our computer is stalled and we're just seeing this thing waiting for us. What's it like if it's giant again? Times 2. Huge. Oh, there's so many different spots that would be interesting to play with. But let's first move some of this dynamic movement inside of the class so that I'm not just telling like 2 of these things to move, because I think they should all have a bit of movement. So what I might want to do is actually just have this be like a speed. I don't think I have that yet. This dot speed equals, let's say, random from maybe minus 0.1 to 0.1. I have no idea how much this should be. And instead of manually telling these other ones outside here to have this movement, I'm going to do it down here in the update. And I'm going to say it should be about here. This dot X equals X off equals a sine wave. It's always nice to give them their own frame count instead of sharing a frame count. So that's this dot FCE++. That's like a fake frame count. is this dot fc times this dot speed times however far they're allowed to walk from each other. So that needs one more value. This dot max, let me call it off max, equals 5. And let's put that here. This dot off max. All right, let's regenerate them. We turned off this change, and that should work now. There we go. Now everyone has their own little movement they want to do. Their speeds could be too much, not sure. I could change their size. That could be nice to control in here, actually. M dot max size equals mouse Y. And then it's interactive. I get to play with this thing. And maybe it should be mouse X. So I can go from really small to like semi-giant times 2. So I can get back to being the full size down to like a size where I can see the whole thing. I think when it's smaller, the stroke size could be smaller, so that might be nice to put back to like 2 or 1. I think they probably need a bit of Y movement. There are maybe 2 static sitting in the very center. If I zoom into them even more, then I could have slightly thicker. Let's test out how thick should it go. There I can see a little bit of Z index fighting happening, covering each other up. Yeah, when it's too small we see nothing, but if we zoom into that thing more, that happens. And maybe, before we run out of time, I should also play with their Z axis and let them take turns coming like just barely in front and behind each other. So I haven't played, maybe instead of this being such, maybe it should actually be the translate for the Z axis. This dot roll dot Z. What happens if I do that? They are no longer. Let me see, I think I hadn't. It's 0, that's why. It also needs a little random minus 1 to 1. It may or may not be a good thing to do, because then some are like literally sitting above and below other ones. Back to a small stroke, we can see through the thing much better. Yeah, I think we do need some spinning action on a Z axis, rotating around. That has quite a nice shine to it. So maybe it's nice to let this thing get bigger, but keep that amount of distance. So I'm going to say, let's have 20. Oops, 20. See if I can handle that. All of these different parameters to mess with. Right now I'm at a detail of 12. Let me go down to 3 so we could have triangles. Ooh, that creates quite an interesting prism. Yeah, interesting. We're not even changing the color. There's so many other things to change. Like I could be having the hue of each one kind of modulate its color, but instead it's really just that slight movement that ends up creating all these different colors as they create these moires for us. So this is that zoomed in. Let's try squares. With the class, it's a little special that I have to do a hard compile each time, because changing the class doesn't actually change each instance of it. It only changes future instances. So I have to do like a hard compile, or I'd have to just sort of repopulate it in some way. Pentagon. Yeah, it's interesting, kind of vectorized. What is this kind of material called? Like, I cannot think of the name of it. Very shiny material. Yeah, maybe some of these speeds are going a little fast. I have the speed set from there to there. Maybe it should be even less from, whoops. Oh, that might be nice. Maybe a little bit faster. You're allowed to go up to 4. Or be -4. Just kidding. 2. 2. There we go. Just that we can hang out a little bit longer in any of those moments. Although it does change it up. I should also let it go really fast and see what that happens. What that does to it. So that was, let's go up to 8. And let me temporarily make this thing fast again. That's not very fast. That would be fast. All right, freaking out. Nope, let's go back. Yeah, now I think I want to give these things a bit of rotation on their Z, which I didn't before. So I was having, their rotation is actually all fixed. We should change that. That requires maybe playing with it here and saying m.rot.z. Although I'm using the Z for the Z axis, that's kind of cheating. I shouldn't have done that. Let me put this thing back at 0. Cut, comma 0. Does it still have the same effect? Not quite. So it's good to have a Z there. I should probably call that this dot. I should have just made offset be a create vector, like the rotation. It'll be 0, 0, random -1 to 1. And I'm going to use that here. This dot off dot z. Should give me, there we go, back what we had before. And now I want to just play with the rotation of their z to get them spinning a little bit and say this equals, if I said like mouse X, then I can spin the thing, or even mouse Y. But then they're all spinning together, and it's interesting how the moiré, that's pretty trippy, part of the coloring stays perfectly still while this thing spins around. But maybe I need to play with some animation. So sine of m.fc, their own frame count, a fraction of it, 0.01, maybe 0.1 was enough, a little rocking motion, times 5. But they're still very similar, so I should throw C into there, C plus. And now they're super far apart from each other, but I could take a fraction of C, or I guess in this case a percentage of C, so that they're all slightly different from each other. I think that's too little. Right, and now we're live coding this value, so it's nice to be able to change it on the fly and see what difference these things make. From super extreme, if these are way off from each other, then we really see their structure, to being like fractions of distance from one another. Then they just have like this slight, they almost look like they're joined in some way. Play with the detail again. Steps of 16. This should probably be a value as well. Everything in here should be a value. That's the lesson. This is like ED for E. Yeah, just call it detail. Equals, they'll start out at 12. And that way I can change this value on the fly. I can say m.detail equals mouse X. But maybe I should constrain it so it doesn't get too big. Or maybe map. Now let's just say mouse X constrain from 0 to, I don't want more detail than like 30. That's tricky because mouse X is our size. So let's use Y. There we go. Okay, but it's such a fine little distance there, so actually mapping would be a whole lot better. I have a feeling I should floor it. 0 to height, and let's say 2 to 30. There we go. Then I can just test out what a few of these look like there, because it's interesting to find these ones in between where it kind of rivets or divots between each one just based on the shading. We get this quasi 3D effect of them like dipping into each other. Yeah, getting some surprising, almost like specular looking highlights on here. That rotation really does something, that Z rotation, because it gives us the shading right up there where they join. Can let the thing get bigger. We've been drawing circles the whole time. Ooh, that's quite cool. Actually, I should let this thing get maybe bigger than 30 up to 40. Because there's some interesting details that appear like so. Yeah, when I let this thing get huge, it's kind of a shame that the size down there is constantly this gap in the middle. Let me see if I can get rid of that. I have the ellipse going from S, and this is always going to be like so. What if I give it like a minus, I don't know, -5? That probably doesn't make a difference. It gives it like a little dot in the center, which actually doesn't do a whole lot. Not so exciting. Let me quickly try another shape. Even though we can build squares by just simply having a low detailed circle, but let's test out what it's like with actual squares. I'm sure I'm gonna have to do a rect mode, but let's do a rect at 0, 0, S, S. And there we get these things coming off to the side. So it's nice to say rect mode center, so they draw like a circle out, and this is the exact same as ellipse, just with low detail. But then of course it could be interesting to have like a custom shapes. I doubt I have time to bring custom shapes into this, but we could quickly try. We have 4 minutes. No, we have 2 minutes. Uh-oh. Let me call it C shape is this. I'm going to say if, whoops, mouse is pressed. No, actually, let's not do that. Let's do a key press, a mouse press. This thing dot push, create a vector of my mouse X, mouse Y. I want to quickly just build a bunch of points. And then we're doing all these things, but instead of drawing one of these shapes, I'm going to draw all of those points. And I say begin shape, end shape, for let CS of C shape, vertex, cs.x, cs.y. Let's see if this works. All right, so it's working, but the coordinate system is off because we're in WebGL mode. So I just have to say minus width divided by 2, minus height divided by 2. Whoops, divided by 2. Click, 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 click. Yeah, and this might be nice to actually draw these things out. So what I'm going to do is turn this back on. If I press my mouse, do this, and I want to constantly check if I have too many. If C shape dot length is ever more than like 50, let's say, I think I can just say C shape dot splice 1. Is that the right command? like so. Do I have to say C shape equals? No, I think I have to say O1. Go from the first spot, take one of them away. Maybe I test it out with a smaller number. There we go. Okay, this is fun, but the circles might have actually been a lot better. But at least like this, I can write some stuff. Yep. Interesting, not as interesting. I can write by, because we are out of time. And even though that works, I'm going to clone it and go back and disable it and go back to just the circle one and finish with that. Because I think here there's a lot more happening than these custom shapes. Yep, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the moirés. Hope they appeared interesting through the compression engine. I'll be back next week, Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Central European Time. Thanks for watching.